This chart shows global industrial output in the early 1700s. The largest section belongs to India, which at the time commanded roughly a quarter of the world's entire manufacturing capacity. The subcontinent was a primary exporter of luxury goods. This translucent muslin cloth, woven so finely it could pass through a ring, detailed with intricate floral embroidery, was a staple of that global trade. Beyond textiles, Indian metallurgy was highly advanced. This sword is made of wood steel, a material created through specialized smelting techniques, prized for their strength and sharpness across Europe and Asia. By the late 1800s, this landscape of industry had vanished. In its place was a country marked by ruined workshops and the horrific human cost of mass starvation, seen here in the faces of these emaciated survivors. This collapse is often described as a failure to modernize, or a series of unavoidable natural tragedies. However, the economic record suggests a different cause. The impoverishment of the Indian subcontinent was the result of a deliberate rewiring of the nation's economic foundation, executed through three specific policy blueprints. The first blueprint focused on agriculture. The colonial administration replaced traditional flexible tribute systems with massive fixed cash taxes that farmers had to pay regardless of the season's harvest. To meet these tax demands, farmers were coerced into abandoning food crops to grow commodities for export. This indigo factory shows the industrial scale of that shift, with laborers processing dye in massive vats to satisfy European markets. In 1770, when the monsoons failed, the lack of food crops triggered a crisis. The resulting Bengal famine killed an estimated 10 million people, nearly a third of the region's population. The administration maintained its tax demands even as the population died. Furthermore, they had dismantled the local grain storage systems that traditionally protected villages during droughts. While millions starved, the colonial government continued to export large quantities of rice to Britain, adhering to a policy of unchecked food prices. The recurrence of these famines follows the internal logic of an agricultural policy that prioritized imperial revenue over human survival. To see where the wealth from those harvests actually went, we look to the work of Dadabhai Naoroji. In the late 1800s, he conducted a detailed investigation into colonial accounting. Naoroji identified what he called the drain of wealth. As this diagram illustrates, he mapped out 4 distinct pipelines that channeled Indian capital directly to Britain. The first 2 were home charges and trade profits. India was forced to pay the salaries and pensions of the British officials ruling them, while British merchants extracted raw materials at low cost to be sold for profit abroad. The third was debt interest. Infrastructure like the railways was built using loans from British banks, but the interest on those loans was charged to Indian taxpayers. Finally, military expenditures used Indian wealth to fund British wars in distant regions like Afghanistan and China, conflicts that served imperial interests rather than Indian ones. This systematic ledger manipulation ensured that Indian wealth financed the expansion of the British Empire, leaving the subcontinent without the capital needed for its own development. The extraction of raw materials led directly to the third blueprint, the destruction of local industry. These stacks of raw cotton on the Bombay docks were destined for British factories, not local weavers. In Inland, automated machines like these could process that cotton into cheap, mass-produced textiles. The British then shipped the finished cloth back to India, using protective tariffs to undercut and eliminate local competition. Master craftsmen were priced out of their own markets. Traditional handloom weavers, whose manual techniques were once a global standard, found they could no longer compete with machine-made imports. This graph shows the result of that transition. India's share of global industrial output collapsed from its 25% peak down to just 2% by the year 1900. This left millions of displaced artisans with no choice but to return to rural areas, placing more pressure on a failing agricultural sector and deepening the cycle of poverty. This deindustrialization transformed a self-sufficient manufacturing giant into a captive market, forced to provide raw materials and purchase imported goods. These 3 pillars formed a complete cycle of extraction. Farmers grew the raw materials, the wealth was drained to finance the infrastructure of trade, and the resulting imports destroyed local industries. Between 1765 and 1900, the total wealth extracted is estimated at roughly 3,800 lakh crores of rupees in modern value. This capital transfer bankrolled the Industrial Revolution in the West, establishing a global economic hierarchy that favored manufacturing nations over commodity producers. This cycle, exporting low-value raw materials only to buy back high-value manufactured goods, established a structural dependency that many developing nations are still working to break today. Recognizing this blueprint provides a framework for analyzing how global trade imbalances are maintained and why some regions remain trapped in the role of resource providers.